Thank you for joining us for this evening's event. My name is Nick. I'm one of the events here at Powell's Books here in Portland, Oregon. And before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming events by visiting our website at powells.com. If you don't already do so, please follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Tonight, we are excited to welcome Antonio de Jesus Lopez and Danez Smith. Antonio de Jesus Lopez has received scholarships to attend the community of writers at Squaw Valley, Tin House, the Vermont Studio Center, and Breadloaf. He is a proud member of the Macondo Writers Workshop and Canto Mundo Fellow. He holds degrees from Duke University, Rutgers, Newark, and the University of Oxford. He is pursuing a PhD in modern thought and literature at Stanford University. His work has appeared in forthcoming in PEN America, Insider, Higher Education, Palette Poetry, the New Republic, Tin House, Poetry Northwest, and elsewhere. Antonio is currently fighting gentrification in his hometown as the newest and youngest council member for the city of East Palo Alto. His poetry collection, Hentification, was selected by Gregory Pardlo as the winner of the 2019 Levi's Prize in Poetry. Hentification nuances Latinidad not as just an immigration question, but as an academic one. It deals with Latinx death not as literal passing of bodies, but as first tied with language. It asks, what are the hauntings of a tongue that is repeatedly told one must learn English in order to succeed in this country? What is the psychological trauma deployed not by right-wing bigots, but by white liberal institutions that give scholarships to Latinx students, but nevertheless prop up white supremacy by viewing their payments as charity? How do Latinx students become complicit in this tokenizing? Hentification wrestles with this survivor's guilt of higher education, a feeling as if you're the only one among your homies that made it. And in an American moment dealing with scandals across multiple universities, this work is a timely intervention that advocates for the first generation audiences, for readers of color, and for all those vested in the protracted struggle for our fair shot. Joining Lopez in conversation this evening is Danez Smith. Smith is a Black queer POZ writer and performer from St. Paul, Minnesota. Smith is the author of Homie, Don't Call Us Dead, winner of the Forward Prize for Best Collection and the Midwest Booksellers Choice Award, and a finalist for the National Book Award, and Insert Boy, winner of the Kate Tufts Discovery Award and the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Poetry. They are the recipient of fellowships from the Poetry Foundation, the McKnight Foundation, Cave Canem, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Smith's work has been featured widely, including on BuzzFeed, the New York Times, PBS NewsHour, the Best American Poetry, Poetry Magazine, the 2020 Pushcart Prize Anthology, and on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Smith is the member of the Dark Noise Collective and is the co-host of VS with Franny Choi, a podcast sponsored by the Poetry Foundation and Post Loudness. So this evening's event will include an audience Q&A. So please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well as if someone has typed a question you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Most importantly, please consider supporting Lopez and Powell's by purchasing a copy of his debut poetry collection from us. A link to buy Hentification along with a link to Smith's books will be shared in the chat a couple of times tonight. So Antonio, Danez, we're thrilled to have you both, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Nick, and to all of the Powell's team for having us here tonight. Thank you to everybody in the audience for being here with us. Please feel free. You are highly encouraged to use the chat tonight. I think all of us have been locked in these Zoom boxes for a while, and hopefully for a while longer. Stop acting like COVID ain't over. You know, I think we can utilize the chat to give your praise. If you hear a line, either in a poem or in the conversation that really stands out to you, feel free to quote it there, something like that. If you just want to give a ooh and a ah and a shout, we can make this feel like this room is alive as much as possible, especially showing love to our poet tonight, Antonio. Antonio de Jesus Lopez is a poet I had the honor of meeting at the Tin House workshop a couple of summers ago. I was facilitating the workshop that him and a whole bunch of other super brilliant writers were in, and I was just like, there's teaching that things like that, there's always at least a couple of folks that you come away truly being a fan and excited for. And I knew Antonio was the shit because I had them write new poems every day, and bro was snapping on the first drafts. And so I was like, oh, what he do with some time? And I think it was like a year or two ago. It feels like a while ago now. He sent me via email a draft of Hentification, and I knew immediately that this was a book that was urgently needed in the world, a world that is always rapidly changing, sometimes on your own block. You know, I was thinking, I read this book this week, preparing for this in the middle of a rapidly gentrified neighborhood in Philadelphia. Walking around here, my neighbors have conversations about how much money's been offered to them to move out of their neighborhood so the neighborhood can no longer look like them. And so, you know, gentrification is something that I think is hotly on our minds. And I think this brilliant academic text, this book of Psalms that Antonio has offered us, will change a lot and open and embolden a lot of minds as we think about how gentrification is something that is affecting our communities as we fight back against it. Truly, truly, truly a brilliant poet. I'm so excited for our conversation tonight. Antonio will read for a little bit. We'll talk. If you all have, yes, Tin Home, I see folks in the chat. Yes, it is indeed a wonderful thing. Feel free to continue to sing your praise. If you have questions that come out throughout the night, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. We'll get to those in the last 15 minutes. But everybody, please send your energy to the chat. Holler if you're at home. Wherever you at, give a hoot for Antonio de Jesus Lopez, everybody. Antonio.
Thank you, Dinesh. Such a beautiful introduction, beautiful words, y'all. It's a dream to have this space with you virtually, pals. Man, it's just my brother cannot, you know, I can't express my gratitude for you to share your day with me, for everybody in attendance who will listen to this in the future. Thank you so much. I want to get out the way, so I want to have this conversation with Dinesh. So I'll read a couple poems, but I'm just gonna try to make the room comfortable and read some of this work. So this first poem I'm gonna read in vein of what Dinesh was saying about gentrification. A lot of my work wrestles with the idea of like ruin, right? Like both this idea of demolition, like you ruin something, but also the historical sense. You know, we go to Rome, we go to Greek civilizations. There's an air of this is a thing which once stood, but it's beautiful and we will study it for centuries. I think for me, I'm becoming obsessed with this idea of like our cultures are worthy of that. And as we look upon displacement, not just as a vector of the past, but that it continues to be present with us, even if the people or the buildings aren't there anymore. So I feel like art as archive, art as preserving and honoring, like a lot of the work I'm realizing retrospectively deals with that. But I'll shut up and I'll start reading it. So this is called Triptych of the Adobe Kata Army. And as you can hear, I imagine this poem is kind of like, I was thinking of the old emperor, Chinese emperors, terracotta men, and they're these guardians of his tomb. And so I imagine the homies on my block and the people guarding this sacred space. Triptych of the Adobe Kata Army, East Palo Alto, circa 2000 AD. My fingers are desperate to unearth the ruins of my countrymen, only to find a Tesla on the second floor of our apartments, now a parking garage. The Amazon logo smirks above me like a biblical cloud. Out here, hooded saints tore the covenant of earthly silence, passed out zigzag leaflets to preach the gospel of skin. Whirling dervishes in long white tees bum rush me at a bautizo, pressed against my lips a cholo's chalice. My chest flushed at watching boys bronze into adobe kata, a driveway floodlight, the barrios moon cast their bodies as they placed bets against the armors they carried. A fist tucked inside a hoodie, his knuckles spelling the names of ex-lovers, each letter tatted with a paper clip, cock belt buckle whose colors shout to the block who he fucks with, until asphalt swallows him again and Maria's now mourn Jesus outside a sagging fence, wreathed his chain link with lit candles, cardboard signs saying, "We miss you," streamers without the heated balloon that promised flight. Consider the clothesline as a bandolier, slung over ruined soldiers whose uniformes still cling onto apartment balconies. Quien cedieron sus tierras to raise the wrinkled flags of blusas and neon vests. Consider this Aztec sacrifice. A father offers an empire his daily flesh, kneels on the melted tar of its tongue, winces at the body turned legal tender, all to nurse the newborn with this vision, una vida mejor. And so, Father cradled my head inside asphalt, prayed for a right to simply wade. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna read one more poem, one more poem, and then we'll get to the convo. If that's okay with Dinesh, that's okay with Powell fam. All right. Like I said, I have a lot of people in the lineage to thank, and I try my best to honor that lineage. So in that spirit, I'm gonna read a poem called Sideshow. Sideshow. And if y'all don't know it, look it up. You know, you'll love it. Sideshow, after Dinesh Smith and E40. And on his day off, God said, "Shake them dreads." Bolts rain from braided crowns. And this, the first time I hear thunder. Count the Mississippis, like PBS said, the fresh to death disciples that flint the blacktop with dabs, lightning hands that make Cassius blush. And after using up all his sick days, the Lord chants, "Go stupid." Miguel hands me a Four Loko. I sniff the Dixie's lip when homeboy yells, "Ándale, bruh." The pulque drips down my nostrils, and under this freeway bridge, I vision when he first swapped met his feather headdress for a Raiders lid. And not even showing up to work, the Most High blast. Now watch him swang. Apostles snatch my hairless arms and summon me to two-step atop a Toyota. From the hood, car and kid Jekyll into stainless gamblers, betting whose chassis will first cave in from the stomps of Tim's and the 12's boot. And after putting up his 2 weeks, God throws that slap back, "Ghost ride the whip." And my heart thumps with that good shit. I confess to an OG, I'm tripping, Rob. It's Father Darius from Mount Olive AME. He quotes a verse from the book of Friday. Oh man, that's just the chronic. Fine honeys latch onto butterfly doors. The black Chevy in front of me screeches at the scent of burnt tires and 4-inch pumps. And on his last day, God MCs the whole damn thing. Now gas, brake, dip, dip. Little man slide through, riding on these scraper bikes because the sky was taken. And after that, God don't remember shit. But DeAndre recorded the rest. Supposedly, Jesus grabbed the rest of the fifth, climbed atop an AC Transit, Oakland's tallest Sinai, and straight dissed his old man. Tell me when to go. Thanks, Edo.
My dude can write. One more time for Antonio, everybody. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation. I think that poem I just want to jump ahead to another question. So I want to know, so like reading this collection, right? I think you're very, you bow to like a lot of your, or at least like point to a lot of influences, right? That poem, Me and E40, Amiri Baraka bow to in the penultimate poem of the collection. And also I think starting the book, right? You can see like, okay, like, you know, we're doing like some Latino Chicano poetics thing, you know, think about like growing up in like, you know, Latino and hood in LA, that you might be surprised by the time you make it to the middle and you're getting the story, you know, these Islamic names and communities and kinships that are coming up and selves that are coming up in the collection. I guess I wanted to know what has solidarity and like cross-racial community meant to your poetics and to your politics so far? What lessons or maybe tools have you picked up through reading writers outside of your community or building or just like living with folks from different walks of life from yourself? And how does that manifest itself in this?
Yeah, no, appreciate so much of the question. It's one of those topics that I know as a country and as a community is kind of difficult and it can get heady. But I think for me, I'm grounded in the community I grew up with. Shout out to you know, Oakland-based baby. And I feel like the communities I grew up with, and historically, it was so fluid the way we thought about home. And I've spent most of my life in the US in this little community than let's say in Mexico, or let's say in other ancestral homes. And my classmates could say the same thing. So being Americanized is a very unique process for me where you are like rubbing shoulders with other cultures. Now, obviously, those cultures aren't mine in the sense of, you know, of ownership, but there is influence, you know, what you hear the music on the street, you know, the paleteros selling food, all that cramped up in a space. You hear Tongan and Samoan. And I think for me at a young age, like learning to honor that, especially when it's under so much threat, when you feel like it's like an island of affordability in a sea of wealth, like you don't know how to handle it, you know, and so you know what you've got here is so precious that it's so important to preserve as far as how you perceive it. So when I write, when I'm in conversation with, let's say, James Baldwin, I'm not saying like I am trying to imitate the Black experience as it relates to a Latino, but it is saying that as I've lived in these United States, I've tried to understand my experience with help from like other traditions, like the Black tradition, who've contributed so much to understanding how to navigate, how to survive. And so there's a lot of homage and honor. You know, I think the title of the manuscript I sent at Tin House, shout out to Allison, was called Homenaje, homage. I feel like a lot of my work has been like bowing my head and appreciating that. But I think for me, like maybe taking those risks and reaching alongside other communities. Solidarity for me means that like, I'm not gonna pretend to know that experience, but I'm gonna unabashedly share my joys and appreciation of brushing alongside that, and bearing witness to it, you know, and seeing how I can help out with mine. You know, there's this poem, and later in the collection, Magical for Realism, and it talks about how like one of the lines is Miss Nelson told us to stop speaking Spanish in class. So I decided to live in the mouths of Devante, Michael, and so forth. And so it's like, there are these conditions that are put upon you and you have to still make music out of it. And so what you listen to the music around you, and the music around me was multi-ethnic, you know, so many different cultures. So yeah, I don't got it perfect, but I think in this book, I really try to honor like my roots, and my roots have been, you know, all across the board. So.
Word, beautiful. Thank you, man. Okay, so you just mentioned, even just you saying the title of that poem, right? Magical for Realism, hentaification, right? You're interested a lot in the pun, I think, or like in wordplay in a very typical way as a poet. And also I think that leads into like places of like comedy or even irony, you know, popping up in your world. We were talking on the phone yesterday, and we were talking about like, you know, irony in the sense of like, especially racial irony, right? And using certain like bits of language or iconography, but it's in subsets. I'm just wondering how how did you find yourself wielding that tool throughout the collection, this particular like ironic or this like you're a funny motherfucker, right? Like you're like interested in like playing around with language in a way that I think is meant to wink, you know, and a lot of
yeah.
like wink, chuckle, but also stab a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, where yeah, has that always been sort of who you've been in poetry? I wonder when did that unlock for you?
Man, that's real. I appreciate. Yeah, that's a fair question. I think it has a lot to do with like because I came starting. So just as a brief description, I went to a K through 8 public school education, Title One, struggles and so forth, and had my share of encounters. And then from college, or excuse me, from high school forward, I went to college prep. And so I think I have a very sharp divide of like having one experience of underfunded schools and then extremely well-funded schools. And it goes from like black, brown to white. And so I feel like, especially the early work in the book, you see like there's a lot of anxiety, I would say, about a certain gaze, like a white gaze, a well-off gaze. And I think comedy has become like in that tension, a pressure valve of like letting myself have fun, but also get my point across. Being able to like, and also I feel going back to influences, studying the greats, like, the way comedy at its best works, it gets people's guard down and people are suddenly the air and tension is different and you're able to kind of slide in remarks and people aren't ready for it. And so people are more comfortable and they're loosened up into it. But also I think for me, there's kind of like a subversion of like, yeah, we're talking about tough experiences, tokenization, being isolated, feeling like internalizing issues, but also like I'm gonna laugh at it, and that laughter is gonna be for me, is gonna be people who notice it, and I think it also is kind of like almost like a court jester role, where in a place that is elite or in a place that ostensibly is historically not for your community, you're able to get and sneak in these layers of tidbit of satire. So I feel like I've latched onto it because it allows me to be truthful while also allowing me to create levity, levity for myself, levity for my community, and so forth.
Right, beautiful. So you also mentioned, you mentioned your own education. I want to ask you about the role of education on the manuscript, right? So if you look at the book, right, it is like the cover itself is like a notebook. And if you look at the table, I feel like if you don't look at the table of contents, you might miss it. The first time through, I know I didn't look at the table of contents again. And I kind of missed that the book is structured as a course, right? It's structured as a syllabus, right? We get course description, learning goals, text. These are the things that mark the collection. We even end with this beautiful poem called Appendix, right? I don't know if it is the appendix or if it's a poem called Appendix. I don't know. Niggas be fucking with the structure of books, and I get excited. Right, we even have like a final exam, in the book, right? I'm wondering, when did that form and structure come to you in terms of the collection? How far into writing the poems were you, and what is your goal, I guess, and who are you hoping to reach?
Right on.
Structure it as this class. Yeah.
No, for sure. I gotta name my people. I had the blessing to work with Kathy Park Kong as my advisor in Rutgers. And I remember she looked at this unruly manuscript and she, I write some long ass poems. I'd be feeling sorry for people in my program. They're like, this motherfucker is going to another long poem and the sixth person's not gonna be able to read their shit for workshop. And so I do feel pretty bad about that. And so I remember Kathy sitting me down and being like, Antonio, you got to think about your shit as like a score. You have these long forms, so you have to find ways of cutting it, of creating melody, of it's like with studying the greats who do long poems, Whitman, Ross Gay, you name it. You have to let the language surprise. And so I feel that in that sense, I was trying to think of ways I can cut the poems and do create a kind of score and act and scene. So originally it wasn't syllabus, it was almost like cinematic, like acts. But then as I started to notice the content, a lot of it did end up being like academic based. Like I do remember the course description. I pretty much ended up the first draft like this. So I think in my time at Rutgers, I was really thinking about like the legacy of going to PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and going to elite spaces. This idea that like a lot of people in my community were saying, "Oh, he made it. Like, what he's one of us. Like, he's able to be out here in these spaces." And internally, I'm still struggling with like navigating this space, like not feeling like I'm really in my comfort zone. And so I feel like these poems came from an anxiety to express the underbelly of a lot of my experiences in these spaces, and kind of almost like John Keats put it, counter narratives, right? Like narratives that like tell the other side of it. So I hope that answered. You had some awesome questions. I hope I answered them.
No, it did. It did. I guess I was one like, and that did answer. I think you're saying, so I guess a question about the process. So if it was more cinematic and all these things as the idea of, because right, you're definitely presenting counter narratives, there's poems that are happening in this like sort of lane of education and school space. I guess how did the poems morph to meet that new framing, right? Did you find yourself at a certain point then like, I guess, yeah, did it like, was it different, before you said, oh shit, I'm actually writing a course,
Yeah, I think with each poem, it kind of like a tunnel or a flashlight in the tunnel. I started to understand what I was obsessing about, what I was anxious about. Like for example, Conjugations of Matthias Bach, right? Like it's a poem that is framed in a table of conjugations. I wrote that when I was in community of writers, and I remember, shout out to Brenda Hillman and folks out there help advocating for me too. And I wasn't thinking about like the syllabus form at that point, but I think if you look at, when I look at the chronology of poems I was writing, I saw this thread of like, I'm talking back to a gaze that once upon a time I felt was patronizing me, and I needed to unlearn it for myself. Right. And so I feel like, when did it come? I would say probably when I had written my master's thesis for Rutgers. I don't think I had these frames yet. I think they still were kind of like act, or they were sort of morphing into it. But I took some time, several months after graduating, and I feel like it's so important for poets just to live life and to let the poems really crystallize and like get yourself on like astral projection, like stepping out of that poem shell and being like, oh snap, I'm obsessing about this. And I think just doing that time capsule for myself, I started to see, yeah, I'm messing with influences of other traditions. I'm talking about urban landscapes, but at the heart of it, it's a very individual journey. And I think hearing the feedback from my colleagues, hearing it from Kathy, I started to understand, you know what, this is an academic book, and that's why it ended up like that. I also just finally say, sorry, I'm taking so long with the answer, but just the forms themselves, like I really wanted to play with form. I think the academic syllabus lent itself easily to making a book because I already wanted to fuck with form. And I felt like, okay, well, what form is more academic that and also that I hadn't seen? You and I, we talked about, we're trying to like remix this game, and I hadn't seen a syllabus poem. And I thought, I want a book that ostensibly teaches you about somebody's experience, my experience, but then the irony of that self-reflection. And so it's like a trippy experience, it's a trippy framing, I realize, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, that was perfect. I think I was trying to tease out like what, yeah, I think you're getting to it. Like there are certain poems maybe that got you there, and then also certain poems that sound like they were only possible once you had sort of found this footing within the manuscript. It's a brilliant, if y'all ain't know what we talk about, hurry up and buy and rush the order so y'all can join in on this conversation about this poem. I want to talk about, you mentioned the anxiety to perform or to like talk to a gaze, right, in poetry, in the poems, but I feel like there's also poems that feel very alleviated of that gaze, right? Poems that feel kind of free from it. And there's also, right, this like, I can't even say you use Spanish in the poems. You are a poet of two languages, right? This is a book that is interested, that is, for English and, for Spanglish readers, really, in a lot of ways. Because the language, there is so much Spanish that it's almost a fuck you to the white gays, right? It's like, you can't like
have fun figuring it out.
Have fun figuring it out, right? So you're already screwing with the gays too. But there are, like I'm saying, there's also such tender and beloved poems for family, for kin, for friends that to me, even if white people are somewhere in that poem, it's not for them, right? It's not for their eyes. It's not for their energy. I'm wondering, can you talk about writing towards different audiences in your work, right? If we're all sort of coming into the classroom of Hintification, what are you hoping different students walk out with?
Yeah, man, I love it. I think that the sense of intimacy in a very expedient answer, in part, in my time at Rutgers, I remember, shout out to Rigo. Rigo would always sit me down and say, all right, like, obviously you're good at wordplay, you're good at being acrobatic with linguistics, but when are you gonna talk about yourself, motherfucker? When are you gonna be honest about how you feel? When are you gonna be tender? When are you gonna be candid? And I do feel that there's a maleness about me as a speaker putting up a front in a lot of my poems. Like, in my early work, we can call it that, like in college and so forth, or even in my time at Rutgers early on, there were like these very ostensible fuck yous to white supremacy, to the powers that be, to remarks that I heard. But rarely did I risk like changing myself in the process in the poem. Like the speaker, the Antonio Lopez that I knew before the poem, did not change after the poem. Maybe I was able to get one or two punches into someone, but I feel, so my answer to you is, in part, intimacy and talking to family members allowed me to like peel those layers, because suddenly it's not about being emotional, it's about talking to my mother in relation to being in an elite space. And just thinking of that thread line compelled me to open me up in these ways of like, I have to suddenly imagine a space where I would originally, traditionally, if it was just me, I would think of it as contention, right? I'm thinking of it as, who's out here to get me? I got a guard up. But if I got my mom in the frame, then I'm thinking like, look how beautiful this place is, how much I miss you. There's a tenderness there. Or if I'm talking to my father, if I'm talking to kin, I feel on an expedient way made me do what I needed to do, which is change myself in the poems. But also on a second level, I think it did sophisticate what I'm looking at, because these spaces aren't just, obviously, they're not just about oppressing people or about tokenizing. They're also moments of celebration and joy. We talked about, like, look at the NBAs this year, yo. Look at all this glamour and accolade, and plenty of those folks have their share of stories. And so we're at the other side of it. So I think gesturing towards family allowed me to move towards celebration, allowed me to move towards love and tenderness and care. The flip side of the book, right? The book has a very provocative cover, but if you open it, it's like there's so much more than just that specter of aggression. And I feel like there's affect, and I feel like family allowed me to really elucidate that and can.
Beautiful. All right. Reminders to the folks at home, please, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom. We're about 10 minutes away from turning our heads towards the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please make sure you pop them in there. Antonio, I want to talk about faith a little bit in the collection, but first, could you read God Dios Salah?
Yeah, definitely.
Appreciate it.
I got you. Pulling up my own table of contents. You think I know it right now?
Page 86.
Thank you.
It's a long book.
Damn, it's a long book. I'm sorry, y'all. Fuck, I'm sorry, Dinesh. You had to read all this. Should have given you like the scholastic
Don't
version.
apologize to me. I just had to laugh because I think maybe it's a dude thing to have a big book, but I feel like it's also like, it's not a debut thing. And I was like, oh, Four-Way really likes this book because this is 100 and something page debut. Yeah. And that's usually like a third, fourth book flip.
Oh no. shout out to and I had to really, shout out to Four-Way. Like, and I was like, and I want an appendix. You're like, motherfucker, what?
It's a poem though.
Yeah, it is. All right. God Dios Allah. Whatever tongue speaks to you today, see to it que mi corazón sea un frasco overflowing with el agua de los arroyos, the tear ducts de tu misericordia. Convierte mi vientre a un huehuatl, a drum to celebrate our union. Melt this taut pottery with Ibrahim's embers. Hoil my clay so that I am ensnared in your bosom. Make my heart an oil stock, whose inner mesh clutches onto the dregs of rosemary inside the nave of Our Lady, or Mayan copal, African frankincense, quetzal feathers know not why they can burn, yet yearn to incinerate themselves until the fragrance reaches your nose mountains. Rid me of Adán's obsession to stake every plant and creature with Latin namesakes. Que mi cuerpo sea un cirio, with an adobe shell that quietly endures the heat of this dunya, enough to light this basilica. So God's children, kings and beggars, monjas y urias, peasant and pope can see each other's toes and keep the lines straight.
Beautiful. I'm wondering if you could talk about what writing about faith in this collection. We encounter, I think in this poem and in others, right, we encounter both Islam, right? And you're coming into that, you're coming into Islam. But we also encounter, right, these Aztec gods. I think the Spanish does a similar thing that like sort of Black English does, which is like you can't get away from like sort of implying a Christian God in a kind of a way. And maybe that's also about like upbringing too, but like I think like just somewhere in the language God be located in our shits, right? I'm wondering, could you just talk about like about how faith developed in the collection, and whether I'm wondering if you felt different energies writing towards different faiths and figures as you went through.
Yeah, I think a lot of the poems that make me trying to wrestle, because like in my personal conversion experience, like it was a tough time and there was like discord and I wasn't able to really, I think, have a smooth kind of transition, to call it that. I feel like there was a lot of noise in the world about narratives about what is Islam, what is not. We still don't think of Islam as American, even though in my experience, like the Islam I navigated was black Muslims. Like the time I spent in North Carolina and the Masajid out there in Newark, New Jersey has a ton of Black. It's like Philly. I know you see Philly, and like people say Ak, and Ak is like brother, in Arabic. So it inflects the language, and so I feel there definitely was an energy, because I think I needed to write these poems because there was so much noise around me that tried to really flatten the conversation and make it black and white and make it, here's Catholicism over here and here's Islam over there. When in my day-to-day experiences, I'm teaching Rutgers class in the morning and then I'm going to the masjid in the evening on Saturdays, and I'm talking to a guy who might have done time, or an older gentleman who was part of the nation, back then. And it's not to say I'm going to write about all of them, but it's like we're so fluid and if we're really honest about ourselves and our work, even we're so embedded in community, and especially like when I was in Newark, like you just see that metropolis. So I feel that when I was writing these poems, I think I was trying to connect these different aspects of my life in a time when I felt it was so like stitched, and it was so loosened, and it was so fragmented. And to answer your question about how I felt, I mean, the whole reason why I got into the Islam game, call it that, I don't know why I call it that, but just the act of prostration changes you. Like the act of bowing your head and making your head lower than your heart, right? Or the idea of prostration is that your forehead touches the floor, and so your heart has risen more than your mind does, right? So your heart is in a more elevated position than your mind is. And I feel like it's in a similar way, writing these poems compelled me to think of poetry differently, not as indictment, but as reverence, as reflection, as like, I don't got it figured out, as mystery. Like, I don't know why I'm invoking Our Lady at the Basilica. I just know that I'm also writing about this mosque, and I'm trying to also understand what's my lineage to this thing that is so new to me. So I think it was trying to create history when I didn't feel it was around me.
Word. Can you talk about that? I mean, how was that? I mean, you're trying to make history in a book that is also very actively thinking about the gentrification, which is like sort of the erasure of people in history.
Yeah, facts. Right? History,
yeah. I guess what was your relationship to, say, invention then in that way, right? It's a historical convention into like sort of fiction in this reality. Where did you find yourself leaning towards real? You know, maybe towards, let's say, like some version of the confessional, but where did you find yourself narrativizing in order to get the feeling right? How did truth and imagination, let's say, conflict or maybe like interact?
Yeah, I think it was tough because like a lot of those poems is, but even the Islam is me trying to be honest with myself. It's me trying to sort out like, and I think early in conversion too, in general, there's a lot of like elatement and excitement about stepping into something. But in that elation, there is like a, wait a minute, let me try to like really come to grips about what I'm doing, what is going on, not kind of, just getting into it too quickly. But at the same time, at least I feel like the divine and spirituality does have an element of like, you got to let go a bit of the real, a little bit, because you, at least in the very concrete sense, and you have to connect yourself to a community and a tradition that is just so grand and enormous. And like, you're taught the names of the prophets and of the companions, and all that stuff it's just so enormous. So I feel that I found myself narrativizing as I'm telling the story of how I arrived to that point. But then I started fictionalizing once I planted my feet in a particular physical landscape, let's say Jersey, right? Like, let's say Jersey, like, there's a poem called Thieves of Light, and I'm talking about the imam and the brothers there that I interacted with. But I think the fiction comes in when I'm having these daily dialogues, but they're not going to tell you the big picture stuff. It's just, you just pray together. A lot of that imagination is on me and imagining how I want to inhabit the space, or how I think I'm inhabiting the space. So a lot of it, I think there's kind of a lot of there's some extrapolation where I don't got to figure it out, but I do have a yearning to be in the process, even if it means I'm kind of in the dark a little bit. If I'm in the dark, I'm gonna at least make art out of it. I know it's a funky way of thinking about it, but I hope that helps.
It does. I'm wondering if we could talk just a little bit about you being a city councilman. I love that a city councilman just released this book, right? Like that brings me great pleasure to think that
let's see if it happens again.
Huh?
Let's see if it happens again.
Let's see if it happens again. I'm pretty sure the book will happen again, but you won't get elected again. We rooting for your reelection. All right, it's coming. Just don't piss nobody off.
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly.
Which is hard to do in politics.
The good grace.
I'm wondering how I mean, right, like even like the thing about this this event is, right, I think the politics of poetry. I'm wondering how you see your poetry as part of the work that you do. What in your own politics maybe has been informed by poetry, whether your own or others. And I guess like where poetry ends, its use, what work are you trying to pick up?
Yeah, I think politics, at least like in the more detrimental aspects, like even has like a negative word, right? And it's funny because poetry, they're sort of seen as these polar opposites. Like politics is this kind of has like a sense of corruption, of pragmatism, of it is what it is. Basically, people out here not really looking out for you. In poetry, at least most people think of it as like pie in the sky, dewy-eyed, idealist, like quixotic, like you looking at you looking at, you know, Don Quixote looking at the windmill, you know.
Mhm.
And I think for me, in a time when a lot of people are hurting and a lot of people can't really see next week for a lot of reasons, poetry is always like underscoring for me personally what's possible. I find myself the best, most effective legislator or elected one if I write a little bit in the morning, because number one, it widens my gaze. If I'm looking at a particular issue, it's not just the minutia of like, you know, 2 million gallons of water, or here are the dimensions of this real estate that we're looking at. It's like, what's at stake and who are the people that I'm connected to and tethered to. So I feel like the poetics of politics is always insisting upon expanding the radical imagination, even when we have agendas, right? As in literal agendas, like the meeting agendas, which are inhibiting and really constricting what we can do at a given moment. It's never, it's like the civil rights movement talk. There's that documentary, Eyes on the Prize. I feel like poetry is that prize. Like the prize is always pushing forward more the envelope, the horizon of what we as communities of color, as dispossessed folk, queer folk, however you want to box it, can do. And I feel that the arts in general will allow us to create civic engagement too, because like, and I'll end with this, there's a lot of like discord nationally, and where we don't really have conversation, where we don't really broker dialogue. And I do feel, maybe naively, that literature and arts allows us to create a neutral, which isn't really neutral, but it's a third space that we can talk about concrete experiences without asking somebody to like tell their story, right? We're exchanging ideas and having conversations that we otherwise wouldn't have, because we have this thing and it's art. So it's not only are we telling truth, but we're telling beautiful truth, and that beauty moves people. And I feel like the practice and the rhetoric that is necessary to get people to listen, only practitioners like poets can really make it like move, can really compel people to act. And then
Right. I think you just spoke beautifully to this, but Marley asks, Marley Cosgrove, Morelli, sorry, asks, do you think that by opening your soul through poetry, your experience and viewpoints allows others to look within and gain awareness and understanding of backgrounds and cultures through a growth mindset? I think you've spoken to this beautifully, but if you have anything to add to that specific question, please feel free. But I'm also gonna, I think, tack on and ask this question. What works for folks who are out there, right, looking to poetry in order to like actually like widen their view and maybe their action in this world, besides gentrification. What texts are texts for you that have poetry texts that have been monumental in your political understanding or your action and movement in the world?
Oh, incendiary art, past, you know, it's just Pat Smith, you know, she's the queen, you know, there's more that I'll think of, I promise. Ross Gay's catalog, and but I don't want to get into the nerd out real quick. I want to honor the question, which is basic. Can you repeat it? My bad. I got it.
Yeah. Do you think that by opening your soul through poetry, your experience and viewpoints allow others? So, like, I think by writing poetry, do you think that your poems, your experience and viewpoints allows others to look within and gain an awareness and understanding of backgrounds and cultures with a growth mindset?
Yes, there's an uncle of mine back in Mex, my tío Toño, and he tells me how like, he told me like there's no greater example than education. And or sorry, no greater way of teaching somebody than by example. There you go. So flipping it, which is basically like, if we're asking people to be better human beings and to then we have to be that example. And I think with poetry, opening myself up and being really honest and saying things like, I didn't know you converted, I didn't know you had these experiences, but I can't expect somebody to move beyond their privilege or move beyond the ways they usually do if I don't also risk something. I feel like both parties or all parties, they have to risk changing how they perceive themselves from the beginning of the conversation. So we leave out of it enlightened on both ends, on all ends. And so I feel like poetry is an art, is a practice of civic dialogue. It's just a really beautiful act. It's just a really beautiful way of doing it. And it's a very individual, like, it feels like one-sided, but you really are enriched reading and experience. Most people don't know what East Palo Alto is. They don't know, they think it's, if they hear it, it maybe, oh, they think Palo Alto. And so instead of moralizing or telling someone you ought to know this, or doing, I think in a lot of echo chambers, like we correct people and saying, here's where they messed up or here's where they're wrong. I think poetry instructs in a very, it invites and instructs, it invites you to rethink something and to understand different cultures and peoples. And I think it can only do that when the speaker and narrator risks, putting themselves like that. Because I think readers are smart and they can see when you're not risking either on your end too. So,
word. I'm wondering, also, y'all feel free to add questions to the Q&A. We're in the home stretch here. Oh, wait, there's another one. Oh, just said, thank you so much. No problem. No problem, Cosgrove. I'm gonna not mess up your last name, but I know Cosgrove, or your first name, but I know Cosgrove. So you're talking so much about, like, the transformation of poetry. I'm wondering, through writing this book, what did you feel? Are there any lessons, anything you learned about yourself, either as a writer, as a human, through writing this book? What did you walk away with?
I think, thank you so much for the question, Inez. I think it created a lot of closure for me. I'm not saying that issues of the academy and elite institutions, or even the issues that were in that finite period have ended. But I feel that having now been in the position I am as a councilman, as being back in my hometown, I don't look at these institutions and issues with the same kind of anxiety or aggression. I think, like, for example, I went back today to my old high school, and I gave a talk on political rhetoric. And maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I think I'd have a lot of resentment for things that happened there. And I think creating this book has allowed me to, not, no pun intended, I swear, but graduate right into a different kind of mentality, where it's not the feelings I didn't have before. It's not that they're untrue. It's that I think having moved on to different arenas has allowed me to more appreciate those moments and allowed me to step back and keep evolving, right? We're not, even if we never touch on an issue again in our work, we as human beings evolve and change from it. And I think having a book crystallize into these experiences allows me to see the breadth and beauty and blessings and burdens that I had, like, throughout the process. So it's not just a one-dimensional, like, a book is not just a provocation, it's also like a peacemaking. It's also with myself. It's like, I'm good and I'm better than ever. And a lot of it has to do with because I've been able to produce this collection of really yearnful confessions to myself, to the people I grew up with. There are apologies in here. And it's just this tenderness that I would have been able to accomplish had I not had those experiences. So I think I've learned that the issues that I'm talking about here, I think they're more in the background now. And I think I'm more directly facing my community now. And I think now more than ever, it's more prescient and pressing for me to write an ode to others, right? And not just talk about the negative issues that once upon a time were impinging on me.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, and Anthony. Thank you, Antonio. We have another question here from Christina Harper, who says, after a lifetime of voracious reading, mostly novels, I am new to poetry. I've just ordered your book. Hey, everybody, be like Christina and order the book and look forward to reading it. But do you have any advice for someone with no education for getting the most out of it?
Yeah, no, I mean, shout out to you for switching genres like that, going from novel to poetry. I wish you the best of luck. A lot of our beloved poets, Inez and I were talking about yesterday, are also genre switching and genre blurring, and they're going from poetry to the novel. So all these received forms are just that, they're received, but they don't have to stay that way. We also remix them. So I would say poetry at its essence, to quote my partner Janelle Pinella, shout out to Janelle. It teaches stillness. Like it really, the pressure point, the diamond that is poetry, it really compels you to get to the essence of things, even if they're long poems, right? To get to the essence and atomize those affects, those moments, those ideas that make a moment a moment. And it could be anything from like a bird, the tassel of a bicycle, the hairline of someone you love, the pastry you ate. Whereas I feel like novel would more stress plot and character development and arc. And so I think there is no set rule that I encourage you to, don't read like, oh, how do you write a Sestina? How do you create a villanelle? Those things will come and go and we change them. But I think the heart of it is, I think the consciousness of poetry is pretty distinct from other forms. And I think at the bottom of that consciousness is like understanding that whatever I'm focusing on, the point isn't that it's inherently good or bad. It's that focus. It's that almost spiritual meditation on something that I think the scope of longer forms just can't afford, because you're pressed to keep going to the next deadline, the next chapter, the next character. Whereas poetry really is like, it's whatever you want, so.
Beautifully said. Whatever you want. Yeah, Christina, the only thing I'll tack on is don't feel like the poem is smarter than you. Take whatever you can from it. Whatever you can. You need no education. You just need eyes and a heart. All right, Antonio, thank you so much for your time tonight. I wish you and this book the most blessings. It is a phenomenal collection, y'all. Run out, buy one for you, buy one for your friend. Antonio, I'm wondering, before we hand it back to Nick, would you read us one more poem just to take us out?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see. You know what? We'll do that. Yeah, we'll do that. One second. I'm getting to the page. I promise.
What poem are you about to read for us, for those of us who want to follow along?
This is page 41. After I take my shahada. After I take my shahada, November 20th, 2015. Rashid pops his Chevy 08 and offers me the cloth. Its silk thirsts in the imported oil of his fingers. I unfurl the Moroccan cloth, and I'm a flower boy again. My salted petals ensnared the mariachi, guiding trumpets to cry inside my chest. The singing brass melted my torso as a stuttering trompo who slipped from the strings of papa and skidded onto La Plaza. My legless body grew the steel tips, zapatearon los nervios away. The brothers shout Allahu Akbar, and I am anointed to dervish. And I too hear the words where my forehead meets sajada and chants God's name. Thanks, y'all.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for reading that. And this is the book here. Once again, please, everybody, check it out, get a copy off of pals.com and support Antonio there. So, well, Antonio Danez, it was so great to host you tonight and, well, have you with us. And we're grateful for the whole conversation and all the thought-provoking, stuff. So, and thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. We look forward to seeing you at another one of events soon. And once again, thank you, Antonio Danez, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody at home. Make sure you go get this.
Thanks, y'all. Support Danez's work too. Support Pals. Donate to Planned Parenthood. Do all that. Much love. Please, know what I'm saying? There's so much at stake. Read poetry. Save the world. Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Night, y'all.